Good morning, and welcome to Chapel Chat. I'm Pastor Kevin Little, and this is the chapel at Rantoul First United Methodist Church. Last week was annual conference, and for those of you who are unfamiliar, that is the yearly gathering of clergy and lay people for our specific conference of the United Methodist Church. We are in the Illinois Great Rivers Conference, by the way, if you didn't know that. Each conference meets like this every year to discuss business, set the budget, and to set the appointments for all of the clergy. Our state has two conferences, which are basically divided between the Chicago area and the rest of the state. Some states might only have one, and other states might have three or even more, depending on their size. But at each annual conference, the clergy are gathered at a certain point to discuss business specific to them. For me, the most important thing that we do as clergy is to vote to approve more clergy. This is the final couple of steps in a very lengthy process, and the opportunity to be welcomed and celebrated by our peers in this moment is great. Or at least it seems great, because I'm not quite done yet, and my first step was interrupted by COVID. But I can't wait for next year when I take that final step. Anyhow, every annual conference has this process of voting to approve new clergy that are taking these steps. But like I said, these are the last steps in a long process. So today, we're going to chat a little bit about that process and, unfortunately, take a look at a messy situation that has developed in Florida. So here's how the process is designed to work. In 2013, I approached my pastor and said, I think I'm called to be a pastor. He said, here's a book to read that talks about some of the different pastor roles here in the UMC and what they can look like. Read that and spend some time thinking about this for sure. 3 years later, I go back to my pastor and I say, yep, I'm supposed to be a pastor. I've thought it over for a while, and I think God really is calling me to do this. My pastor's response then was, great, let's chat about this some more and get you started in the process. So we talked and set up a meeting with the entire church then to vote about whether they thought that I should move forward to be a pastor. The question that people are trying to answer is, can I see evidence of God's calling in this person's life? Luckily for me, they answered yes, and I moved on to the next step. From there, I had to interview with the District Committee on Ministry, which is a group of local pastors and lay people who try to answer the question, can I see evidence of God's calling in this person's life? And can they communicate this effectively? One question is answered mostly by interviews, and the other is answered by writing numerous papers and reports detailing my thoughts on theology in the church. Once they had approved me, I would then enter candidacy, where I went to a weekend retreat, read a bunch of books, and talked about theology with other people, starting the process. After that, and passing a psychological examination, I went back to DCOM and interviewed with them again. Same question, luckily, same answer. Now, to be ordained as an elder in the United Methodist Church, you have to have a master's degree in divinity. So I started seminary. And throughout school, I still had to meet with DCOM every year to check in and answer that critical question, can I see evidence of God's calling in this person's life? I never interviewed with the same person in this process. So throughout all of it, the number of people answering yes to that question kept growing. As I was finishing school, I was ready for the next step. I interviewed with DCOM one last time and handed them 20 pages worth of papers detailing my understanding of theology, a sermon, and even a Bible study that I had written myself. They answered their question once again and also decided I was ready to move forward to the next step and interview with the Board of Ordained Ministry, or BOOM, as we call it. Now, BOOM's goal is the same, but with more of a challenge built into it. This is a deeper conversation about theology, our understanding of the denomination, our understanding of the church, and determining not just, can I see evidence of God's calling in this person's life, but also, can or should this person lead the church? These interviews are done by different people still and require a bunch more writing. Another Bible study with more requirements in it, a sermon that's been recorded as well, and answering 26 theological questions about what I believe about God, evil, the Trinity, the church, and a bunch of other things. This interview is supposed to be tough, and people don't always make it through on the first try, or even if they do, they often have some things that they have to rewrite or flesh out a little bit. Now from here, we start residence in ministry, which is what I'm in now. And as I finish that, I'll write another 30 to 40 pages worth of papers and interview with Boom one last time. If they can still see evidence of God's calling in my life, I'll move forward and finally be ordained as an elder and a full member of the United Methodist Church. Now, folks, this process takes at least 5 years, at the absolute fastest. I'll have finished in 6. If someone comes into our denomination from another denomination and they're already ordained, already have a master's degree, and are completely ready to go, it still takes a minimum of 4 years. By the time we get this far, we know what we're doing, and the people interviewing us are confident that they can see God working in and through our lives. In Florida last week, 16 people were denied moving forward into provisional membership, the step that I'm in right now. 2 members of that group of 16 are openly gay or bisexual, and a portion of the clergy in the Florida Conference had an issue with that. For commissioning, as this step is called, many conferences vote for the entire group coming forward instead of individually, and this was the case in Florida. Now, I'm not going to dive into all my thoughts about homosexuality, although most of you know that I'm pretty progressive in that aspect of my theology. But I do want to recognize that each of these 16 people had been in the ordination process for at least 3 years to get to this point. Some conferences are longer, but that's the minimum for the denomination no matter what. They had met with their pastor. They had met with their church. They had met with DCOM at least 3 times. They had met with Boom. Every single time, those people could see evidence of God's calling in that person's life. And because a few people had hang-ups with their sexuality, all of those previous people were either misled or just didn't know how to do their jobs properly. Now, this vote required a 3/4 or 75% approval, and it failed at 70%. A second vote was taken after some of the clergy realized what was about to happen to this entire class of incoming clergy, and they got to 72%, but still not enough to pass. And so 16 people have had their career and calling interrupted. Perhaps the most frustrating thing for me right now is the fact that some of those pastors that voted against them are in the process of leaving this denomination to join the newly formed Global Methodist Church. They aren't sticking around, but they have set back the lives and careers of those clergy by a year at least. Clergy who are planning to be here, or at least were planning to stay in this denomination until this point. Who knows what's going to happen now? The process of becoming ordained in the United Methodist Church is grueling. Many other denominations have a much faster, much easier path. Getting as far as these 16 people did takes dedication and proves once again that they are called to be here, not somewhere else. And now the pastors that voted against their commissioning and are switching to another denomination don't even have to deal with the fallout or the fact that once again it's the name of the United Methodist Church that's in the news. So those of us who remain are left to deal with any fallout and public questions. Now, I can't imagine doing this. There's no point where if I was leaving the entire denomination behind, that I'd have even shown up for that vote, let alone voted to disrupt the lives of incoming clergy, altering their career path and damaging their perception of the denomination that they are trying to move forward in. But there you go. That's our process. And that's what's happening in our denomination. It's a mess. But we're still here, and we're still trying to clean it up the best we can. I don't have any brilliant words to close out on. I just needed to vent a little bit today and let you know what's happening here in our denomination. So thanks for joining me for another Chapel Chat. I'll see you here again next week. Have a great week.